Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy. I'm one of your hosts here, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing well. Ready for more? We actually had activity on the field
Yeah,
since
it's
we last
exciting.
talked to you.
Yeah, since the last time we talked, if you don't remember, we broke down the Packers draft, a bit of a, how we were feeling in the moment, and then we talked a little bit deep dive into Lucas Van Ness. Today we're going to be doing a bit of a discussion on the two tight ends the Packers took in this draft, Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft, as well as discussing a few other things. We're going to be doing these episodes as we go, a couple players in each single one, because we got some time until activities start up again, although we did just have rookie minicamp this past weekend, and we got some stuff coming down the vine with OTAs, etc., etc. But we got stuff to talk about here. We talked about the draft last week as a whole, if you want to go check that out. And we talked about Lucas Van Ness last week, if you want to go check that out. But today, like I said, we're going to be talking about Musgrave and Kraft, who we're both really excited to chat about. But before we do that, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you heard, come follow us on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes, articles we find interesting, interviews, news, analysis, etc., etc. And if you like what you heard even more, come subscribe to us on your platform of choice for podcasts. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, etc. And you can also find us on YouTube. We post all our episodes there as well, so come hit that subscribe button. It'll really help our numbers. But Dad, so we got two tight ends to talk about, but before that, we got some news that hit from since our last episode until this one.
Right, and as we were talking about last time, we were just before the deadline for the Packers to exercise Love's fifth-year option, and they hadn't said what they're going to do really one way or the other. And so the day that deadline came due, they actually signed Love to an extension.
And wait, can I just interject here? One of us was right about what was going to happen, and it was me. I said they might extend him. You said they were going to give him the fifth-year option, and I would take my little victory lap right now. But break it down, Dad. I think Field Yates has the details. Field Yates of ESPN tweeted out essentially the details of this contract extension. But yeah, and pretty much what it means is it's a little less.
Are you still taking your victory lap?
Of course. It's a little less guaranteed money for Love, a little higher ceiling if he hits some incentives, but take it away, break it down.
Right. So what he got in return was a $13.5 million guaranteed. The tag would have been 20.7 or 20.9 million guaranteed, something like that. He does have a higher max, $22.5 million max. So a little less guaranteed, but a higher maximum amount. He gets a signing bonus now of almost $8.8 million. So that's money he has in hand right away. While the fifth-year extension, he wouldn't start getting money until September of 2024, because that is a salary that comes in like game checks. And so he got the money a lot earlier this way. His base salary actually, I think this year went down to 1.01 million from, I forget, down from almost 2.3 million. And then as can be up to 9 million in guarantees, which the way they're written, they're not necessarily likely to be earned. And so if he gets them, they would end up getting put onto the 2024 cap. But it does end up splitting his value, his contract value, a bit more onto this year and next year. And I think there may also be some void years.
No, I don't believe there are any void years. But in terms of cap hit, it does hit more on this year than next year. So
and more than it would have by several $1 million.
Yes. And I think the big thing here is a lot of people, I've heard takes all over the spectrum. Well, not all over the spectrum. I think I've seen takes that have said this is a big win for the Packers. I've seen takes that said this is a big win-win. I think where I land on it is a big win-win. For the Packers, you're not committing as much guaranteed money to if Love struggles this year, you have more of an out next year where you didn't need to take the fifth-year option. And you also don't need to be in that awkward position of not accepting the fifth-year option and not showing confidence in Love. And then if he's good...
Not having no contract for 2024 would be a weird way to play 2023 and be very surprising. And wouldn't be a good way to go about being, negotiating for the next year if they wanted to. Exactly. And I think they didn't want to end up in the whatever $40 million for Daniel Jones kind of contract territory either.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few different ways this go. There's the Daniel Jones, where the Giants didn't pick up his fifth-year option. He had essentially the best year of his career, but in a one-year sample size, that's kind of scary, and they were forced to give him a massive contract. Not forced to. I mean, if he plays well, it's worth it, but you're pretty much banking on 1 year of production, which would be the place the Packers would have been if Love played well and they had declined his fifth-year option and didn't extend him. Or the Sam Darnold, where the Panthers picked up his fifth-year option, and then he played very poorly, and they had all this guaranteed money on the books for him, paying essentially a subpar starter, massive first-round pick amount of money. And you don't want to be in either of those scenarios, really. So this was a nice, happy medium. And on Love's side, I saw some people say that this was him betting against himself because he would not be able to earn as much money as quickly. And to that I say, if he plays well this year, he's going to get extended next offseason anyway. I think if he plays like to the level where he would get an extension, like he's probably going to get extended next offseason. They're not even going to let him hit free agency. So to me, I think it's a win for him because he gets money up front. He gets a little security in case of, God forbid, knock on wood, injury. And yes, he stands to make less money next year, but he has the safety net essentially, and I don't think they would let him play out that year under this extension. I think if he plays really well this year, I think they would just give him a longer-term contract because they wouldn't want to let him get to free agency. That's my take.
If he balls out this year, I think they'll rework the contract and extend it in a way that would increase 2024 if he's really killing it this year.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the Packers have 2 years to evaluate how good he is.
Yeah.
If he's kind of looking good, maybe 1 other year, see if he improves. And if he's like Sam Darnold, then
I think the kind of good thing is a little scary because
that's part of what the Daniel Jones Giants, what they call that situation where you're stuck with a mid-level quarterback that you have to pay a high price tag to.
Yeah, it's a little scary if he plays kind of good because in my opinion, next year would be the year where when you have presumably 2 first-round picks, assuming that the Jets pick conveys to a first, would be the year you would try and move up for a quarterback. Is the one thought. It's like if he plays kind of good, do you risk waiting a year when you have premium draft capital and you could take one of the like better quarterbacks in what is supposed to be a good quarterback class? I don't know. But that's something we can discuss down the line. That is not a problem right now. Jordan Love is going to be great. You heard it here first?
I saw some stats. I forget who posted this or tweeted it. That he had the highest percentage of on-target passes in the entire league for quarterbacks over, I forget how many passes. He was number 1 with 93%.
Quarterbacks over 7 passes? I think he only threw he might have had 15 attempts last year. I can't imagine he threw the ball more than 20 times. I mean, let's see. He got game action against Philly, which is when I think a lot of people were like, oh, not bad. Not bad at all. And then did he even have other game action outside of that Philly game?
Yes. He came in at the end of the Minnesota game.
Yes,
he also played some of the Jets game. Played in some of both Minnesota games, actually.
I was gonna say the first Minnesota game, right?
Actually, it hasn't been here. Both, and he had. Yes, he did not have that many. It was only 21 attempts.
I was gonna say it's not more than 30.
It was 62 in 2021, but it was only 21 last year.
Yeah, because he didn't even start a game last year, which is part of the reason that they didn't give him the 5th-year option. Is you know who the lowest number of game appearances is for? It was 30, and he would have been had 1.
And we talked about that last episode,
yes,
where the lowest was Patrick Mahomes.
That's right.
With 31, and
he would have had
1.
And so it's okay, that's tough. But anyway, that's pretty much where we stand on the Jordan Love contract situation. But as we record here on the night of Wednesday, May 10th, he did have his first presser as the starter for the Green Bay Packers today. And he had some, mostly just kind of run-of-the-mill, excited to get started, et cetera, et cetera. But there were certainly a few quotes that I found interesting pulling from this interview. Namely, just going to kind of run through like my breakdown of what I thought. I thought, he seemed very calm and level, like kind of just how he is as a person. He's just kind of smooth and even keeled, I would say is the best way to put it. He said he got some, his training and prep hasn't changed since like he knew he was going to be the starter. But he has been able to get some more work with guys outside of the system now that he's going to be a starter. He worked with Aaron Jones and Romeo Doubs out in California this offseason.
Yeah, and there's some clips of that as well, videos when that happened.
Yeah, with Jones especially. And then says he's learned a lot from being able to watch Rodgers the last 3 years, but that the last 3 years have felt kind of long. Says the hardest time for him was when Rodgers re-signed or had his contract extension last offseason, because I think the quote was, okay, well, where do we go from here? What do I do? Because, he's a guy, like, he's a competitor. He was a first-round pick. A lot of people had him as a first-round pick in that draft, and he wants to play. I mean, he wants to compete.
Players always want to play. Do you want to sit on the bench? You want to play. You want to play.
Yep, you want to play. And so he said that was really tough, but just kind of kept his head down, kept working. And I think the other interesting thing, the quote he kind of ended on was, we all know that it's ups and downs in this sport. And he said, quote, I know it's not going to be easy this year. One thing I do is I tell myself every day that I'm good enough. It's never as good as you think it is. It's never as bad as you think it is. Was kind of how he was talking about. I think the question was with regards to how is he going to handle like rough patches in the year, because, it was a very young roster, which he said he's very excited to grow with this skill position group and this roster around him. But it is a very young team, and I think we should expect some bumps along the road. But just some interesting quotes from that. Like I said, I thought he was like very level and even keeled and seemed very comfortable in front of the mic. And I mean, he has been doing this for 3 years now, but step one, be comfortable in front of the mic, be comfortable being the face of the franchise if you're the quarterback. And I thought he purported himself pretty well. So it was a pretty nondescript press conference though, overall. They also had Kenny Clark and Aaron Jones on press conferences today. Those are also pretty standard stuff.
And I think both of them also talked about love a little bit as well.
Yeah.
Supporting him or whatever.
It's like Aaron Jones said, I think the quote I saw from Jones that was that was fun was like, there's nothing more fun than proving someone wrong, and I think we're going to prove a lot of people wrong this year, something like that, which is
Super
exciting.
Bowl, baby.
Hey, why not? Why not? But anyway, those are the main pieces of news from Packers land. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode, as we like to say. And let's talk about these two tight ends that the Packers... meat potatoes that the Packers have drafted this year. And those are Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State and Tucker Kraft out of I almost said San Diego State again, out of South Dakota State, different SDSU. But, Dad, let's start with Luke Musgrave.
Yeah, the weather's a little different between those two places as well.
Just a touch. Let's start with
somebody from Southern California. It's like, what's going on here?
Going to South Dakota State on accidents? Like, this is not the beach.
Where are the palm trees?
Let's talk first about Luke Musgrave, their first second-round pick. Pick number 42, tight end out of Oregon State. 22.6 years old, so he's going to be 22 years old at the start of the season, I believe. And, Dad, what was your initial reaction when they picked Luke Musgrave?
So I was excited that we were getting one of the top tight ends. I was hoping we were getting one. It wasn't necessarily my first choice, and at the time, I was actually thinking of Darnell Washington from Georgia, who turned out later we found out that he's got some kind of knee issue that he's not that worried about, apparently. I was hearing somebody talk about that. It was that he had some inflammation after the combine. But he was killing it at the combine. But anyway, it was enough, apparently, to spook a few teams, and probably including the Packers.
More than a few. I mean, he fell all the way to the pretty much mid to end of the third round.
Pick 93, end of the third round. So he dropped a lot, because some people were talking about it being a possible first-rounder. So obviously some people were concerned about that. We'll see what happens. Hopefully, for his sake, it all turns out to be nothing, and he's good to go. But the Packers went with Musgrave.
So he was one of your top tight ends, is what you were saying, though.
Yeah, there were a few tight ends that I preferred, and probably the ones I was most interested in were Washington, Musgrave, Laporta, and Kraft.
Mm-hmm. Who we'll
Kincaid,
talk about shortly.
We didn't see any testing, so maybe if he had done testing, maybe he would have been on the top.
Yeah. So for me, did you have anything else you wanted to add to your initial reaction?
Just for the initial reaction, that was kind of it. I was excited we were getting them. It's like, okay, we got one of the top 5-ish. Um, he
Yeah.
was I think the fourth one to come off the board.
Yeah, and for me, I think my initial reaction when the pick was made was like I was just excited that we were getting some pass catchers, some investment in the skill positions, because specifically at tight end, the cupboard was really bare, and I knew we needed a tight end. It was a good tight end class. It was a great time to take a tight end. Musgrave in particular would have been, I think, fourth or fifth for me. I think I liked, if I remember correctly, I liked Washington as my highest tight end, obviously without knowing medicals, and then Laporta, and then Kincaid, and then I think Musgrave Kraft were kind of 4-5 for me.
Yeah, I was a little sad to see Laporta go earlier in that round to the Lions.
Yep. But for me, I was excited about the investment at pass catcher because I think the number one thing this year is Jordan Love good? And in order to know that, you got to surround him with some more talent than we currently had on the roster. And so I was excited about the investment there, I think, more than anything. Excited to get more athleticism, more speed on the field. And let's talk a little bit about that athleticism and speed, because as we were going to do with all these prospects, we're going to talk a little bit about their physical profile, their production profile. We're going to talk a little bit about what scouts have said about them, what the Packers have said about them. But let's start with that physical profile. And just to break it down, Luke Musgrave is an athletic freak. He's really big. He is 6'5.5", I believe.
5 and 7/8.
5 and 7/8, so almost 6'6", which is on the upper echelon of size. 253 pounds, and with 32 and 5/8 inch arms.
And pretty big hands, 10 and 3/8.
Yeah, 10 and 3/8 inch hands, so also very big. He had a relative athletic score, RAS of 9.78, which is obviously elite. Didn't put up a ton of reps on the bench, only 19, but his vertical jump was 36 inches, which was close to the 90th percentile for tight ends. His broad jump was over 10 feet, which is well above the 90th percentile for tight ends. An elite 40-yard dash of 4.61. Some people thought he was going to run even faster than that. Elite 20-yard split, elite 10-yard split. Shuttle and 3-cone were just about average with a 4.41 shuttle and a 7.09 3-cone. But, nothing to really throw his RAS completely away. And so really athletic, really big. And some comparisons in terms of RAS that were similar were Travis Kelce out of Cincinnati. So that would be pretty cool. Greg Olsen out of Miami, you might know him. Also would be pretty awesome. Bucky Hodges out of Virginia Tech. Jelani Woods out of Virginia from last year. And then Daniel Bellinger out of San Diego State from last year. Jelani Woods, who's on the Colts, I believe now, and Daniel Bellinger, who's on the Giants.
And people are high on both of them. I think they could actually turn out to be some, both Woods and Bellinger, I think, had some encouraging things in their rookie years.
Yeah, and obviously this is just athleticism in terms of who they're similar to. Doesn't necessarily mean stylistically they're like these players at all, but just, it's good to have good athletic comps. And per playerprofiler.com, he has a 94th percentile speed score, an 87th percentile burst score, and an 84th percentile catch radius with a 71st percentile spark X score. And the comp on Player Profiler is Dawson Knox, who's also had a very nice start to his career with Buffalo. So that's kind of his athleticism profile and how he's looking there. Obviously, a lot of things that you want to see. Good size. Could maybe stand to add a few pounds. He does look a little skinny out there, I think. As of right now, he could use some more.
He looks kind of lean when you watch. We talked about that a little bit. I noticed that as well when we were looking at our two prospects. He looks a little lean running out there.
Yeah, I mean,
not quite as lean as, say, what's his name?
Kuntz.
Another Kuntz. Zach Kuntz?
Yeah, who I think ended up going in the 7th round.
Yes, and he went to the Jets.
That's right. Yes.
Round.
Yes.
And he was the guy who's like, well, maybe they should grab a third tight end. He was the guy who's got the 10.0 RAS, the top one ever.
Yeah. But so I think he is a little thin. Could stand to put on some weight if he's gonna. I mean, he played inline and flexed out in the slot, and even flexed out wide at times for Oregon State. But we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about production profile, when you talk about that in a second, Dad. But is there anything you wanted to add in athleticism? I think the main takeaways are really elite athlete, really smooth mover, fast, explosive. Agilities
You mentioned his Senior Bowl.
Oh, no, go ahead and... Yeah, go ahead and
because
bring that
one
up.
reason why people thought he might have a better 40 than he ended up was he set the record for tight ends in on-field speed at the Senior Bowl. So they've had 5 years of testing now, and he was the first tight end to ever get above 20 miles per hour.
Yeah, and essentially what happens is they have essentially tracker chips in their jerseys, and it measures essentially speed, position on the field, et cetera, et cetera.
It measures total distance, max acceleration, max deceleration, and maximum miles per hour for the players while they're on the field. And so he hit the fastest ever time recorded for a tight end at the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, some people were thinking he was going to like crack a high 4.4s, low 4.5s in the 40. And so, 4.61 when that was your expectations is a little disappointing, but still super fast for a tight end. And he plays really freaking fast.
Right. So he's fast on the field. He's not just, underwear Olympic champion. He's hitting this speed in full gear.
Yeah.
And his 10-yard split is really elite. I mean, you talk about a speed of the 10-yard split at 154 is at 98.7 percentile. And so really, really twitchy and bursty.
And that's something we'll talk about when we talk about our impressions of the player. But let's move on to his production profile because so there's definitely some interesting numbers here from PFF in terms of how he was used. He wasn't used a whole lot. So that is one of the issues with him as a prospect.
Knock on him. If I talk about that, we talk about first about how he's lined up. And he's doing a little bit more. He did both inline and in the slot. So he's actually a little more heavily lined up in line than in the slot. So a little bit more split than I realized. I was thinking he was going to be like heavily weighted towards slot snaps, but he actually has slightly more inline snaps than slot. He doesn't have that much production. So he's had
one thing to keep in mind is that Oregon State is a more run heavy offense. And so and that's almost a good thing in some ways because I've heard several people say you're not going to get on the field if you don't block for them. So he's at least given effort as a blocker, which we'll talk about in a bit.
He doesn't, though. But it is interesting to note that he was talking about he's getting a decent number of snaps, not many targets. But in his receiving grade last year was 79.2%. We've seen his progression every year. So in 2020, his overall grade was only 56%. And then 2021, it was 60%. And then last year, it was 72.5%. His run blocking grade is kind of meh, 54%. He only had one drop last year and generally thought to have good hands. So for his career, he's had 47 catches for 633 yards. So that's 13.5 yards per catch and 31.6 yards per game. If you look at just the last 2 years, he's averaging more like 14.3 yards per catch and 39.4 yards per game. So a little bit up. And he really was looking like he was going to have his breakout year this year. In his first 2 games,
against Boise State and Fresno State.
Against Boise State and Fresno State, he had, 169 yards on 11 catches with only 15 targets.
Yeah. Per
NFL DraftBuzz.com, he produced a QB rating of 93 when targeted.
This year or for his career?
I'm not.
Okay. I just wanted to ask.
Sure.
Okay.
I'm not 100% sure if that was career or this year. And per player profiler's target share was 12.5% in 2021. And then it increased to 29% in 2022 for those 2 games. Went way up. And also his catch percentage was 55% in 2021 and then up to 73% at the start of 2022. So he was really looking like he was going to, because I think they decided to use him more. I think they just like, hey, this guy's our best player. Maybe we should get the ball in his hands.
I know, right?
And so
what a novel concept.
And so that's what I think was happening. And then unfortunately it kind of got derailed. But of course, if he had continued that season,
they would not have been able to get him where they got him.
He would have been like a, 10 between 10 and 15 overall pick if he with that testing.
Yeah.
And that much productivity.
And the thing is, it's like the reason they were able to get him where they got him, he suffered a pretty devastating knee injury. So that is something to keep an eye on. they obviously felt comfortable with it enough to draft him where they did with a top 50 pick. So the Packers clearly feel okay with it. He did have a pretty severe knee injury, but he was still able to participate in the Senior Bowl, like we said, was still able to do the combine
to get there for the Senior Bowl. One other thing I want to mention about his stats, like his yards per route run were really good this year. It's like over 3 yards per route runs, like excellent.
And the thing is like this year he was so much. It was only 2 games, but he was clearly better than he had been previously. And the thing that like he had a lot of drops the previous year, but he seemed to be his hands had kind of come together a bit this year. And so it's like, that is something that we can talk about when we talk about our personal impressions of the player. The hands don't always seem natural, but the drops had kind of cleaned themselves up a little bit this year for those 2 games. Now, whether or not that's just a small sample size thing, because I believe he had like 9 or so drops on not that many targets in this previous year. And so that is something to keep an eye on. Is I don't think he has the most natural hands. He's got a pretty good catch radius, and he's pretty good at like plucking the ball out of the air away from the frame of his body, which
sliding and catching it, but he does sometimes kind of double catch it.
He double catches, he catches with it, he body catches. He has concentration drops, I would say, more than anything. And the Packers are clearly comfortable with taking players like this because they took Watson, who had concentration drops. I think Romeo Doubs, that was part of his profile as well coming out. But we'll talk about that. Is there anything else in terms of production? Because,
So one thing that's a little baby of a flag is his yards after catch per reception is not very high, only 3.5.
Well, let's start talking about our impressions, because I think that's my biggest downside. So do you want to move on to our...
Do you want to do ours, or do you want to do the scouts?
Let's talk about what we thought, since it kind of dovetails in a little bit pretty well. So for me, since you mentioned the yak, he has none. He has no ability in the current estimation of who he is as a player. I think the biggest red flag for me, the hands aren't supernatural, like I said. He body catches sometimes. He double catches. He lets the ball slip through his hands and then grips it to his body in several clips, as you can go find online in his highlights. Like, even when he catches it, it's not always clean. His hands aren't supernatural. He does have a very big catch radius and is able to catch it outside of his frame, and there's plenty of that on tape, like of him plucking the ball out of the air nicely. So that's good. I just don't think it's always the most natural thing to him to catch the ball. The biggest red flag for me is he has really poor contact balance and yards after catch ability. And I worry about the ceiling of a tight end in this kind of offense, where they can't do much with the ball in their hand, because you see a lot of the time, like, how many times have we seen like them run like essentially the little like leak out to the tight end, or just like a little tight end dump off where they're supposed to turn up the field and go. And he's getting, anytime someone touches his ankle, he's going down. Anytime someone bumps him, he's going down. Anytime someone gets a hand on him, he's going down. The turf monster got him multiple times on clips that I'm watching, like where he just turns up field and his legs just go out from under him because he doesn't have balance. And so it's like, this is a guy who, fun fact, was an alpine skier, like a very high level skier. And so you would think the balance would be better, but it's pretty bad. Like, even non-contact balance is bad. And those are my main negatives. There are a lot of positives, though, in terms of my impressions of him. I feel like, personally, he could immediately step into the Lazard role on offense day one. Just in the idea that he could be just like, before he's even adapted to taking a lot of inline snaps, I think he could be essentially a big receiver who can block pretty well in the run game when given a chance to like be on the move as a move blocker. I think he struggles a little bit when he has to kind of like sit and anchor and like move a guy, but when he's like moving and has some momentum, he's pretty good at like turning a guy and getting him out of the lane. And so I think he could be a big receiver who comes down in condensed sets, who can block a little bit and be more dynamic in the passing game than Lazard was on day one. He's really smooth, especially like when he's like, even when he has his hand in the dirt, and when he's standing up, he is smooth off the line of scrimmage, which I know is something we usually talk more about with defensive players, is their quickness off the line of scrimmage, but he definitely has it. Like, he is snapping up out of like a 3-point stance very quickly on offense. Like, he is getting into his route very quickly, and linebackers are not going to be ready for how quickly he's getting up to top speed with them. Those are my big positives. Someone he gets comped to a lot is like a Darren Waller. He's not quite like as beefy as Darren Waller, and maybe he can pack some muscle on. He's a lot thinner.
He's heavier than Waller was coming out.
He's probably like 2 inches taller, though.
No.
Oh, then Waller was coming out, yes. But not then like Waller now, yes.
Waller, yeah. So he's heavier than Waller is coming out. The height is very similar, I think.
Yeah, Darren Waller, yeah, he's a little thinner. But, I don't know what it is, or at least coming out he was. But for some reason, Darren Waller just looks beefier than him. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's the leg length. He just looks a little lankier than Waller, a little more awkward than Waller. But those are my main takeaways. I think he, like I said, I think he could be like Lazard day one impact. He maybe not quite as good a blocker as Lazard, but I don't think he's as bad a blocker as some people say. Like, some people were saying he could solely play F tight end, which is like the type of guy who plays mostly like a slot receiver, essentially. But I think he could come down. The Packers have said, and we'll talk about that, they want to play him kind of all over the place, which I think he could probably do at some point, but that's going to take some time. And I think day one he could definitely come down as he could play like a big receiver type role.
Right, play a big slot role. And so one thing I would say about him is, like, you talk about his testing matches his tape in terms of speed getting off the line. He's got a great 10-yard split and great vertical and broad jump.
Yeah.
So it's just he's got really good 0 to movement ability. So it shows up on the tape as well as in the testing. So that's like good to reinforce that and see that he should be able to do that at a high level. What I saw is I really like the way he moves without the ball. He looks very smooth. He looked really smooth in the clips in rookie camp, inside when they're running through the drills. It's like, oh yeah, that guy is accelerating and changing direction very smoothly.
Emphasis on without the ball.
Yes. What I'd like to see is maybe what they need to do with him is get him the ball on the move in space. So he's in move. Yeah. So he's which is something this offense should be able to do. Hey, audience, is something you could do? Something the Packers offense should be able to do is find players in open space and run it. Maybe not the best idea for him to be getting the ball with his back to the defense.
No.
And then turning and running in the classic Tunyon DeGuara manner.
And to be fair, they're not particularly good at that either. And I don't think it's a particularly great way to run offense, is getting your tight end the ball with his back to the defender coming down on him.
Yeah, except for like like in the end zone, however.
Yes, well, obviously, but no, I see what you're saying about getting him the ball on the move, because there are times at his time at Oregon State where they did get the ball essentially with him going horizontally across the formation, and he's able to turn it up the field. Once a guy gets to him, he's going down, but that's probably the best way he's getting yards after the catch right now, is he's just turning and just not having to slow down and not having to worry about juking anyone. You
scheme him space and then let him use his speed in open space rather than having him try to break tackles. He's not a tackle breaker.
He's not breaking tackles. He's not. He is Jason Witten levels. Like, do you remember the what was it, the year that Jason Witten for the Cowboys had less than how tall he was yards after catch. So like he could literally fall down forward.
Well, that's have more too.
Yes. But the thing is, it's like he really goes down so comically easily, almost the one.
But I do feel like he's moving very. So the other thing is, I agree that he was when I watched the tape of him, I thought he was a better blocker than I expected. Based on the ratings and what I hear, he's like, oh man, this guy's gonna be a terrible blocker. You can never have him in line. But no, he was putting in effort. He was getting in the right position a bunch of the time, and he was, I think, reasonably actually passable downfield.
Yeah. Block. No, I thought he was.
I don't know how holding up in terms of pass, but
not in my estimation.
So that doesn't seem like that's going to be a thing. But his ability to find somebody to block downfield to open running lanes.
Yeah, and he's not going to drive anyone.
Not going to be that terrible.
He's not going to drive anyone off their spot, but I think he's got enough functional strength when he has momentum to at least wall them off and open a lane. Like, he's not going to pancake anyone. He's not going to pile drive anyone. He's not going to push anyone downfield. But he'll open a lane, like, on the move.
Yeah. One thing he's got to work a little bit better on is maintaining his block after he's initially in position and has got his hands on the guy, and not let the person he's blocking shed him and then go to the one side or the other to make the tackle.
Yeah,
that's something he's got to work on, and is trying to maintain the block. Otherwise, I say it looked like he was going to have as we talked about, a big breakout year this year before the injury. That he talked about how hard he worked, and maybe came back a little too early for the Senior Bowl. Though his speed, his time speed seemed to indicate he was doing okay at the Senior Bowl.
And he had, like, a lot of people were raving about him around the week of the Senior Bowl. So it's definitely
one of the stories. He and a few other players were the story of the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and I mean, he was someone that, as we get to it here, a lot of scouts were very high on. So if we can just go to a couple of scout quotes here. Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him as his 29th overall player, his third tight end. Quote, an impressive size-speed athlete, Musgrave runs like a gazelle, and his lacrosse and skiing backgrounds translate to football with his core strength and hip fluidity as both a pass catcher and blocker. He blocks with outstanding body control and leverage to be a physical edge setter and engage defenders at the second and third levels, although he still needs to improve his sustained skills and steadiness as a pass blocker. Overall, Musgrave must continue to build up his football resume and overall consistency, but he is a high-level athlete with the route running and blocking talent to be a productive starting combo tight end in the NFL. Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network had him as his 38th player in tight end 4. Quote, Musgrave is sudden in his release and is a weapon running down the seam. He pulls away from second-level defenders and can naturally high-point the football. He is more of a home run hitter than an option route player at this point in his development. He is consistent catching balls on his frame, but he struggles to reel in low passes when on the move. After the catch, he has the speed to pull away. He is a willing blocker and can effectively shield wall off at the point of attack. Overall, Musgrave isn't polished and he's missed time, but he has the potential to emerge as the top tight end in the class. Kuiper had him as his 40th overall player, tight end 5, and PFF had him as their 49th player, tight end 5. Anything from these scouts stand out? I think the thing that we haven't yet touched on that I think is important is his ceiling. And a lot of people have said that, I think Nate Tice of The Athletic has said this. I think Brugler, like we said, Jeremiah, like we said, a lot of people had him as having the highest ceiling of any tight end in this class.
And that he has the potential to be tight end 1 in this class.
Yes.
And I liked him better and we talked about this earlier in the off season about going for traits and upside for tight ends.
And this was something
rather than production.
This is something I meant to bring up earlier, and I'm glad you brought it up now. But I think my big takeaway from them taking these 2 tight ends is that I'm just so excited they decided that athleticism was the way to go, because everyone in the NFL knows you pick athletic tight ends, except the Packers the past few years. I'm glad they finally realized that, hey, athleticism is more important than production for the tight end position. Like, it's just so much more important.
Right. And I also think, as we'll talk about, because it's hard to predict which tight end is going to hit, that they actually doubled up at athletic tight end in this draft when tight end was such a need. And I was pretty sure they were going to pick 2. I thought they might even pick 3, but though they went with 2 in the end.
They are higher on Tyler Davis than I am. So,
or DeGuara.
I'm higher on DeGuara than Davis, easily.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's DeGuara they're high on.
DeGuara's barely a tight end. Like, really,
this is true.
He's not really.
He's a different position. You're not lining him up in line too often.
No, and like, I thought DeGuara had a very nice year last year, but this man's got no juice as a receiver. Like,
I'd like to
see him
get more chances. We'll see what happens.
I've seen him with the ball in his hands. I've seen it. I'm good.
Yeah, you
I'm
remember
all right.
that touchdown he scored? Was that the longest touchdown pass of Jordan Love's career?
I think the Watson one is technically longer.
Is that one longer? Okay.
Yeah, but I know the one you're talking about, and I'm good. I'm all right. Thank you, though. Is there anything? Oh, yes, we had. Is there anything else from the scouts? Oh, the other thing was his ability to stretch the seam that we hadn't talked about. That's exciting because we haven't had a middle of the field threat in what feels like a very long time, and the
Yeah,
ability
we'll
to
see more
stretch the
passes
seams
over the middle now.
Yes, and especially with I think Rodgers obviously all-time quarterback, but did not have a proclivity to attack the middle of the field, and maybe Love with a weapon who is more designed to attack that seam will be more willing to do it. In terms of Musgrave, though, we're kind of getting down to the last of it. The Packers seem very excited about him as well. But we have some quotes from them that we're going to read at the end because they're kind of about both of the tight ends.
Right. Gutekunst has a few quotes, but he mostly talked about them together. So we'll put those after we've talked about both players.
Is there anything
in terms
else
of there's the pick and whether we think it was like a smart pick at the time or not. So
I think 100% yes.
42. He was the fourth tight end taken, and we think maybe he could end up being the best, the number one. The next tight ends taken were Schoonmaker at 58 by the Cowboys, Brenton Strange by the Jags at 61, and then the Packers again with Kraft at 78.
Yeah.
Other players that we kind of liked that they could have picked at the time were Joe Tippmann if you wanted a center, if you wanted to do you wanted competition for Myers, or Quan Martin or Brian Branch if you wanted to get a safety, or Keanu Benton if you wanted to get a D tackle at that point. There would have been players that I think except for maybe Brian Branch, almost never mocked him to the Packers. So when he goes but that was when he was mostly going in the first round. It's like, no, I was never going to pick him in the first round. But you could say that the Packers needed to rebuild their tight end room. This was an historic class of tight ends. So better to get extras of the high-end players than extra of the lower-end players. If you say you wanted to get a couple safeties.
Yeah, and I think
save doubling up on safety for a good safety class.
Yeah, and I think looking at who was there, the only one that I really think would be interesting to me in terms of the ones we have listed here is probably Benton, Keanu Benton, D tackle out of Wisconsin. But
they also could have gone with a receiver though they picked one a few picks later. Not the one I was really thinking they would at this point. They go like Jalen Hyatt.
Yeah, and the thing is, we needed more weapons for Love, and like I said, I think that was a priority in this draft, and I'm glad that it was a priority in this draft. Anything else on Musgrave you wanted to touch on, or should we hop over to Kraft?
Let's hop on over to Kraft.
Okay, so the next, not the next pick the Packers took. They took Jaden Reed at 50, but we're going to talk about him when we talk about some receivers. We wanted to talk about the tight ends in conjunction with each other. But the next one they took was Tucker Kraft, who is the same age as
he's like 2 months
Musgrave.
Younger or something like that.
Yeah, he's very close to the same age. Going to be 22 to start the year. Tight end out of South Dakota State, pick 78 for the Packers in the third round. My initial reaction to this pick was I was actually really excited about the second investment at tight end, mostly because what it meant for the offense, because it kind of leads to the idea that they're going to look at more 12 and 22 and heavy personnel sets, which I think is just more of a true what Matt LaFleur wants to do on offense. And so I was just excited for what it meant for the offense as a whole, and just more heavier sets, the ability to essentially get into a heavy formation, run if the defense is in a lighter formation with a nickel or a dime personnel, throw the ball if they match heavy with heavy. Just the ability to be more versatile out of heavy sets and pass out of two tight end sets was really exciting to me. And the ability to have two dynamic tight ends, and Kraft is very dynamic, which we'll touch on in a second, on the field at the same time is very exciting. What were your initial thoughts?
Well, so the idea that they could have two tight ends who could do everything on the field at the same time as they develop, maybe not year one, but players who could block and go out for a pass. So they had every kind of play on the table while they're out there to take advantage of whatever the mismatches are. One of my first reactions was that I was happy the Cowboys and Jags picked Schoonmaker and Strange, who I didn't like nearly as much as I liked Kraft. I was shocked when I saw those picks. Kraft, I think, could be the best tight end in this entire class. Schoonmaker and Strange, I was interested in them as a second possible tight end in the fifth round if they had picked one of these top five guys in round two. But man, I was stunned that Schoonmaker and Strange went before Kraft.
And you were talking to me about possibly taking Kraft with one of our second round picks when we were talking about the draft leading up to it.
I was thinking okay, let's double up and get Laporta and Kraft, or Musgrave and Kraft, or Kincaid and Kraft. and with Kraft being one of the second round picks. So
Yeah.
I was really happy when he lasted all the way to 78.
Yeah, I was also surprised he lasted all the way, and I'm not going to complain. But let's talk a little bit about who he is as a prospect, and let's start that off with the athletic profile like we did with Musgrave. Kraft is also an elite athlete at the tight end position with a 9.68 relative athletic score, 32 and 3/4 length, 32 and 3/4 inch arms, 10-inch hands, so massive hands, very big arms. He's 6'4" and a half, essentially, 254 pounds, so a little beefier than Musgrave, the same weight,
Right.
but 2 inches shorter.
He's well about 1 inch shorter, 1 inch and
Yeah.
a quarter. I mean,
One
I'm
and a
sorry,
quarter.
1 and an eighth shorter.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. 6/8 inches. Yes. So 6'4" and 3/4 in height. 23 reps on the bench. 34-inch vertical, which is like in the 74th percentile for tight ends. 10-foot broad, which is elite. 4.6940, which is elite. Elite 20 and 10-yard splits as well. A 4.29 shuttle, which is elite, and then a 7.08 three-cone, which is above average to very good. Some of his athletic comps based on RAS are also Travis Kelce, Dallas Goedert, his another South Dakota State alum, another Jackrabbit, Kevin Brock out of Rutgers in 2009, Dalton Keene out of Virginia Tech in 2020, who's someone I was very high on who has struggled to stay on the field for the Patriots, and then Drew Sample out of Washington in 2019 are all athletic comps for him. If you put in his Pro Day 40, however, which was a 4.63, and you put in his Pro Day 20-yard split and vert, which was a 36.5, it's
so
actually
vert,
all the way.
like you could trust the vert.
Yes, although did they weigh him also at the Pro Day is the question. Like, he might have dropped some weight, been able to jump a little higher. You never know. But if you put that stuff in, he has a 9.9 RAS, which is even better. Per playerprofiler.com, he has an 80th percentile speed score, 68th percentile burst score, 73rd percentile catch radius with an 84th percentile Spark X score, overall athleticism score of a 112.2, and the comp is Logan Thomas, who played tight end for Washington for a very long time, has been a very good player for them. So another elite athlete at the tight end position, not quite as good of an athlete as Musgrave. Musgrave's kind of a 101 athlete in this tight end class, but still one of the better athletes at tight end that has come into the draft in the past few years. Definitely something to be excited about there with the Packers, like we said, banking on athleticism at this position. Anything in the athleticism that you wanted to talk about, Dad, before we move on to some production stuff?
So one thing I'd just touch on a little bit in terms of, let's say, two contrasts with Musgrave. So his 10-yard split, while still elite, is not quite as good as Musgrave's. Musgrave's is like top of the chart almost. But Kraft's agility is better. And that kind of shows up on tape as well.
Mm-hmm.
Kraft is elite for the shuttle, 78th percentile on the three cone, while Musgrave was more like his shuttle was just a little bit above average compared to Kraft's shuttle, which is elite. So that might give us a little bit of context for how Kraft looks on the field compared to Musgrave in certain things. So then we get onto the usage. He, like Musgrave, lined up a bit all over, but he was more heavily weighted to inline than slot. Though still had a lot of slot snaps, maybe about a third slot versus 2/3 inline. And I think if I look just kind of eyeballing it, Musgrave was probably more like 55-45 inline to slot. He didn't, for this most recent year, his receiving grade is 76.6. 2021 was even better. That was an 80. His overall grade was 85.0. His yards per route run was still, in the elite level, but at 2.32, but not like crazy off the charts like Musgrave's was in the 2 games he played. He played more games this year. He played 9, and he's had more total production than Musgrave is. Oh, and I should say, he had 2 drops this year, and his drop rate is only like 6.9% this year, so a little better than Musgrave's.
And he is someone usage-wise who was used a lot more as more of a traditional tight end, a wide tight end in line, blocking a lot more. Used like Musgrave blocked in the run game a lot, but Kraft was asked more to come down, hand in the dirt, actually like blocking. I mean, and you can tell he's a lot beefier guy. He's got a wide body.
He just looks thick. You look at those highlight reels,
wide
he
body.
looks like a thick boy out there.
Yes.
THI-double-C.
THI-double-Q, as I like to say.
And his run blocking grade was better. It was like 69.6, almost 70, as opposed to Musgrave's, which was 54. And his yards after. So a couple things that he's had more production because he's been a more featured part of the offense over his career. So he's had 1,211 yards on 99 receptions. So 12.2 yards per catch and 37.8 yards per game. And over the last 2 years, so the freshman year, he had like one target or something, or very little, and not so much the second year. But the last 2 years, he's averaged 46.7 yards per game.
Yeah.
And that's over 24 games. So that's a lot of games, a lot of production. So he's been.
And even with the fact that it's a lower level of competition at the FCS level, he's still dominating.
He is a man among boys.
He looks so much better than everyone on the field. He looks so much better. So he is dunking on these guys. Yes.
One thing I was not able to find out is how many targets he's getting. So I don't know what his catch percentage was. I was able to get that for Musgrave, so I don't know like what percent of the balls coming his way he's actually able to reel in. The other thing that's different is yards after catch per reception per PFF. Yeah.
This is the biggest thing.
7.7 compared. If you compare that to Musgrave's, what was that? 3.5. So more than twice as many yards after the catch per reception.
Yeah.
For Kraft compared to Musgrave.
And you can see it in the way they play.
Missed tackles forced.
Yes. That's the most exciting thing to me about Kraft is what he's able to do with the ball in his hands.
Now, on one thing we should say that Musgrave's depth of target was much farther.
Yes.
It was over 12 yards downfield as opposed to Kraft. So it was almost twice as far.
Yeah, and I was going to mention
because you don't expect as much yak on passes downfield.
This is true. And I was going to make a point of that, and that their usage was different. Because Kraft was getting schemed up screens. He was getting tunnel screens. They were just trying to get him the ball any way they could. Like, they were dumping it off to him and just saying, go get it. Like, they weren't doing that as much with Musgrave. He wasn't really a focal point of the offense until this year. And like we said, he was only able to play 2 games because of injury. And something to be said with Kraft is he was also dealing with an ankle injury during this past year. With South Dakota State. He was able to come back, I think, for the championship, but I think he missed several games due to an ankle injury, if I remember correctly.
There were some quotes from him about, or in reference to him about working to get back in time for their end-of-season games. And did they win? Did they win the championship?
They did. They did win the championship. I believe they beat North Dakota State.
They finished ahead of North Dakota State this year in conference as well.
And something to be said about him competing at the FCS level, which I'm sure a lot of you have already heard, but if you haven't, Alabama tried to lure this guy away this past college offseason.
He was offered like 6 figures.
A 6-figure NIL deal, and he turned it down because he's from South Dakota, and he wanted to stay close to home and stay with the college that put their faith in him, and he wanted to finish out his college career there. But Alabama saw the talent, and they were like, hey, come on here, we'll give you a big bucket of money. And he stayed. So that's something to show, like, hey, a lot of people at the college level knew how good this guy was. And you hear Ross Uglum and Jake Morley, I think it is, who are big North Dakota State fans, were like, hey, this guy was a problem playing against.
Killing us.
Yes.
They're saying us as North Dakota State fans.
Yeah. Because those are big rivals, if you didn't know, the Dakotas. But yeah, so he's a really exciting player. Did you have anything more for production, or should we talk a little bit about what we thought of him? Because I'm raring to talk about this guy, because I'm honestly more excited about him than I am about Musgrave. And the only thing that's keeping me from getting more excited is the Packers' third-round curse. Shh.
We won't.
Knock on wood.
We just won't tell him about that.
Exactly.
So yeah, let's get into our personal thoughts.
Yeah, like I said, I was more excited about him than Musgrave. To me, I think yak ability, especially in this offense where you're getting the tight end the ball in space, is really important. And man, this guy does not go down easy. And I know he's playing like against guys that were not as big as Musgrave was playing against in the Pac-12. But he is fighting for every yard. They're, like I said, giving him tunnel screens. They're just getting him the ball and saying, go get us a first down. I mean, his play strength is just super exciting because he's jumping through guys. He's bursting through the goal line. He is breaking tackles, stiff arms, carrying guys down the field. I mean, it's just awesome to watch it. He is a fun player to watch play. Just fun to watch.
In some ways, it's a little bit old school football. If you like broken tackles and crashing into people and knocking them over and staying on your feet, then you're gonna like.
I don't want to say it, but he looked like Gronk amongst the FCS competition. Like he looks like Gronk.
I have my notes in here.
Take it away. Take away your notes.
So I was really excited the Packers took 2 tight ends in the end. I wasn't sure. I thought could either go 2 in the first 2 days or 1 on day 2 and 1 on day 3. As for Kraft, I think he has the potential to be the top tight end in this class. He looks a lot thicker and stronger on tape than Musgrave did when you look at their highlights. And he has just so much better contact balance and tackle breaking ability right now, as we talked about. And you probably guys have heard for the last couple of years, or maybe they talked about during this draft about how Meyer for Notre Dame had the nickname Baby Gronk. If anybody looks like Baby Gronk to me in this draft,
is this guy?
It's Tucker Kraft.
Yeah.
And so if you really want to drink some like serious full strength Kool-Aid, Musgrave is Kelsey and Kraft is Gronk. And that's what we're getting this year, right?
Why not? Each? Why not? I think Musgrave's a little more like Waller personally, but to each their own.
Yeah, he could be a little more like Waller. Waller's kind of like the big receiver tight end.
Yes. And Waller's the player they've been trying to trade for the past couple of years. So that's clearly why they took Musgrave.
And so I also think that because of some of the things we talked about, the tackle breaking, I think Kraft could be a fan favorite very quickly. Yes. And you may have seen him tweeting about there's a Culver's at every exit as he's driving cross country for rookie camp.
Well, for me,
quote, do you see the other quote?
No, go ahead.
That I think was interviewed after the draft. I think this is at the draft. Being able to score my first touchdown at Lambeau Field and take the Lambeau leap, that's something every single Bears fan in the nation will hate, and something that I'll be able to do on my own. And so that's I think something
he's a funny
Packers
guy.
fan are going to appreciate.
Well, he, in my estimation, to be a truly great tight end, you have to look like a frat star.
This is right.
Travis Kelce, this is my own personal theory. Travis Kelce, clearly a frat star. Darren Waller looks like a frat star. Rob Gronkowski, clearly a frat star.
You know who the president of that frat is, right?
It's Gronk. Gronk, clearly a frat star. And the list goes on. I mean, Mark Andrews looks like he'd be in a frat. All these guys looks like they'd be in a frat, and no one looks like they'd be in a frat more than Tucker Kraft. I mean, his official Packers photo, he is wearing a backwards baseball cap. I mean, what was it? Someone was joking that him and Musgrave are going to be the beer pong captains of the Packers this coming year. They're going to be the duo running the team. But no, it's hilarious, and I fully believe in this frat. This frat star metric,
right,
and how
that was something we got to put in, like the frat metric. Does that go under?
I'm telling you, all these guys.
Physical profile?
Yeah, sure, physical profile.
Frat metric.
Frattiness, but no, he's just a really exciting player. And here's what some scouts are really high on him too.
How many games of beer pong do you think you've played in the last 4 years?
On a scale of, but I mean, you heard him he accidentally called, like, a woman asked him a question. He said, yes, sir. And he was like, oh, yes, ma'am. Sorry, I've had a couple drinks waiting for my name to be called. Did you hear that quote on his conference call?
I didn't actually watch the quote, but I did read about it.
It was funny. He's going to be a fan favorite for sure. But some scouts are really high on him too. Dane Brugler of The Athletic had him as his 51st overall player, tight end 5. As a pass catcher, Kraft is an outstanding catch-and-go creator with fluid adjustment skills and balanced feet. As a blocker, he might not be polished, but he gets after it with the body control and desire to sustain and finish blocks. Overall, Kraft needs development time to refine his route running and blocking techniques, but he is big, strong, and athletic with the ball skills and blocking tenacity to evolve into an NFL starter. Daniel Jeremiah had him 56th overall, tight end 6. Mel Kiper had him 76th overall, tight end 6th. And then PFF had him 74th overall, tight end 6, with the quote, Kraft is a raw physical athlete who possesses all the traits evaluators are looking for in a tight end. Has an excellent combination of size and speed, but can definitely improve as a route runner. So I think the main takeaway is, while he is really good with the ball in his hands, he's not as pure of a receiver as Musgrave is in terms of like running routes and stuff. But that's something you work on, and I think something with more schemed up touches and in an offense that's looking to get him the ball, I think won't necessarily be as big of a problem.
Yeah, so if we want to, one thing I was going to maybe jump from those evaluations to talk then about the pick value. So he was the number 7 tight end, and the scouts
in terms of where in terms of where we
in the
took
draft.
Him. Yeah,
and so the scouts have him as the 5th or 6th best tight end.
Yeah,
and he went number 7. So you can say there's value there. And then the next tight end taken after him was Darnell Washington, who was hurt and dropped, I think, below what people expected. So I think we got him, like, I would say two tight ends later.
Yeah.
Than
what? I don't think
scouts,
anyone
2 or 3 later than the scouts are predicting.
No one I saw had either Schoonmaker or Strange ahead of him.
No.
And we took him at 78, I believe.
78.
And the lowest of those that I was just saying had him at 76. And the highest had him all the way at 51. So I think any way you cut it, we got great value with the pick. And there are some other players that were certainly available, which we can go over now. But to me, I'm excited to be running more heavy sets and heavy personnel.
And looking at players that
offense.
we had been talking about as possibilities if they wanted to. Darnell Washington, though there were reasons why other teams had passed on him. If you want to get running back this early, which I didn't want to get this early, you could have gotten Tajay Spears. Receiver you could have had at this point, Josh Downs, though I think a little small for the kind of receiver they like.
And the fact they already took kind of a smaller receiver at 50 with Jaden Reed.
Right. They'd already picked one, and Jaden Reed, who we didn't talk about today, but we can talk about next time. Safety, Jair Brown, we liked, but again, we're talking about a loaded position in the draft versus a down year for position in the draft, or at a Tomiwa Adabare, edge / D lineman, somebody we like, but he ended up going quite a bit later than we expected. So I'm excited by the pick here overall. I think looking at who players we were thinking about could have been taken or we might have taken at this point. I think this is the guy.
Yeah, for me it would be between him and Adabare. But I think what I said when they picked him, actually, I think I was on the phone with some buddies and I was like, "Ooh, a second tight end." I'm just excited by the prospect. Like I said, excited by the prospect of running 2 tight end sets. Like heavy personnel is going to be really exciting with this team, and just the variety of things you can run out of heavy personnel, especially if Kraft can be the blocker that he was at South Dakota State. Is there anything else you wanted to say about Kraft before we kind of wrap this episode up? We're getting a little long on time.
So the only thing we have left to say is like Packers quotes about them.
Oh, yes.
And the two combined. So there are a few quotes from Gutekunst after the draft. Maybe this is just after the picks. He said he wasn't overly concerned about their injury histories and suggested that may have explained why they were even available for the Packers to take them. He said they're both all-around tight ends that can kind of do everything. They're not pigeonholed into only being able to be a receiving tight end or a blocking tight end. They can do it all. They both have very good spot size, very good speed, so I'm excited. I do think their best football is ahead of them for different reasons, but I think they will complement each other and they'll be a good fit for a room that we are already have.
They are really good complements to each other. Like they kind of do what each of them is like not quite like. We got kind of more traditional inline guy with Kraft. Got a bit more of a flex tight end, bigger receiver type who can kind of come down and play a little bit of inline in Musgrave. It's exciting to think about what they will be able to do together on the field together, assuming they can stay healthy, because that is a big question with both of them, and I think they both would have gone a lot higher if they had been healthy this past year.
Yep, I agree. So I'm excited. I think a lot of Packers fans are going to be excited. I think the Packers picked a good year to rebuild the tight end room.
Definitely. One of the best tight end classes in a while. And, I mean, we see that with how high tight ends win this draft.
And this and in contrast to other years, like, okay, we want to get some of these elite guys and miss out on them like we did for the receivers a couple of years ago. This year, we were able to get them. I was getting a little nervous, actually, at the beginning of the second round.
When Laporta and then Mayer went
Laporta
right back to back.
Back to back. It's like, crap, it's going to be a run on tight ends now. It's going to happen again. We're excited about getting some of these top guys, and then they're all going to disappear. But they managed to last until the Packers picked. And then one of them even lasted until they picked in the third round.
Yeah, it's very exciting. And the draft as a whole, I think, has been very exciting. And if you're interested about hearing more about it, we're going to break down even more prospects in the coming weeks. We're going to try and do 2 to 3 prospects in every episode. So if you like what you heard here, come hit that subscribe button. We're everywhere you can find podcasts, Spotify, Apple, Google, YouTube. We have our podcast there. Hit our subscribe button there. We'd really appreciate it to help our numbers. Come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes and anything else you might find interesting, whether that be news, articles, notes, etc. Thanks so much for listening. And Dad, do you have anything else you wanted to add before we bid farewell to our dear listeners?
I think that's it.
All right. Until next time, go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.